Hi everyone, today we're going to go over phonology and we're going to start with an introduction to the universal properties of human language. But before we get started, let's go over the lesson objectives. So the objectives for today, and hopefully after this lesson, you will be able to identify the universal properties of human language, define and identify phonemes, including consonants and vowels, and determine the differences between syllable timing and stress timing, as well as intonation, word stress, rhythm, consonant and vowel articulation, and use the terminology that you'll learn from today to be able to describe each of these in an English language learner's monologue or oral language sample. So let's start with the universal properties of human language. Okay, so we're going to start off today talking about the universal properties of human language. Let's go over them first, and then I'm going to introduce you to an activity where you can match a cartoon as a representation of one of these universal properties. So the first universal property is that language is culturally transmitted. So we know that language is a part of culture, and that all humans live in a culture or cultures. So for example, the culture of society, the culture of your friends, your family, and the way that you speak in each one of these different circles is going to be different. And that sort of is an example of how our language is culturally shaped and transmitted. So even though you might speak the same language in each of those small subcultures, your use of the language changes, and the words that you use might change, right? You might be more informal with your friends than you are with your family, or than you are with a teacher. And the only way that you've learned to speak in these different ways has been through the language of those different cultures. So the next universal property is that language is productive. And what that means is that words and phrases are transmutable, or that they can be moved around to a certain extent to form different combinations of words that mean the same thing. The next universal property is that language allows for displacement. And what this means is that it's a reflection of our reality, and the fact that our lives are governed by time. So in language, it allows us to talk about the past, the present, and the future. And that is a characteristic, a universal property of human language. The next universal property is that language is dynamic. And what that means is that the way that we speak now has not always been the way that we've spoken. And that's true for every language, right? Language changes over time. So we get new vocabulary. Some terms become sort of old-fashioned. And it's very much influenced by technology and by our realities. So if you think about the vocabulary words like eBay or Google, which can be both a noun or a verb, or things like, text me or Twitter, those things are examples of how language is dynamic. Language can also be arbitrary, and what that means is that it's sort of a random set of symbols that we've chosen to represent the sounds of language. So, for example, the fact that we label different objects with names, like a table, and we call a table with the term or label table, that's something completely arbitrary. If we wanted to, we could decide that instead of the word table, we were going to actually rename that a blurg. And so for the context of this class and all the students that we agree with, that agree on this, we as a subculture could call it a blurg. And so that's just to show you that the labels that we use and the terms that we use in language are arbitrary. And then the last universal property is that language is made up of discrete or distinct sounds. Only 5% of the world's languages have developed writing systems. And so wherever there are human beings, there will always be a language that is comprised of sounds. And those are specific individual sounds that are then put together to create words and sentences. So what that means is that those sounds, to become words, to become sentences, can be cut up into their most discrete or distinct parts, and then represented that way in writing as well. Okay, so now that we've gone over the universal properties of human language, what I'd like you to do is the first activity, where I'm going to ask you to match cartoons with one of those universal properties of human language. You can also write a few notes about how the cartoon represents that property and what that universal property of language means. To find this activity, you can go into Blackboard, where you located this PowerPoint or this video, and you'll see activity 1 listed there. Otherwise, you can click on the link that is showing up on the screen right now, and that will open the Word document for you. So at this time, you can press pause and take a couple of minutes to fill out the sheet. See if you can identify which cartoon represents which universal property of language. Okay, let's go over it. So the first universal property of human language was that language was culturally transmitted. Hopefully you chose this cartoon, which shows a baby being talked to by his family members. And that really relates to the point that we learn language through sort of a social setting with interaction with others. The next universal property was that language is productive. And you'll see that this is the cartoon that should be matched with it. We see this guy saying, "Dude, why do you talk backwards all the time?" And the answer is an example of how there are multiple ways to communicate different ideas. So this particular animal says, "Backwards talking I am not. English-centric view of grammatical structure you have." And so it shows that we can organize words in different ways. The next universal property that allows is that language allows for displacement, meaning that we can talk about future, past, present. Hopefully you chose this cartoon, which is talking about today, tomorrow, and yesterday. Universal property number 4 is that language is dynamic, and that it changes across time. So there was this cartoon that you should have chosen. Waiter, the soup is fly, showing that fly was a word that came to be known as a synonym for cool. You could have also chosen this cartoon, which shows how jive, me hearties, and 10-4 are all different ways of speaking that are more appropriate in particular contexts than, for example, in a play. Okay, the next universal property is that language is arbitrary, and you should have chosen this cartoon, which makes fun of sort of the random nature of the word foot, right? And if you repeat it again and again, it sort of doesn't really have any more meaning. Also, the man decided to desert his desert in the desert shows you how words that are spelled very similarly or basically the same have different meanings, and so it was sort of arbitrarily assigned to these different meanings. And then the last one is that language is discrete, so you can see how language is developed through this cartoon, starting with ba ba ba, and then going to ball, and then I want ball, and then the last one, which is pretty funny. You should have also chosen this last cartoon, which shows how one could end the word would with different Ds. So just to show you that again, language is broken up into discrete sounds and discrete parts. Okay, so before we get into phonology, let's go over the subsystems of language in general and talk about what it means to know a word, among all the different parts that you actually know about it, but that you don't realize. So we can use this example, right? This woman who is trying on different shoes, and she says, "Look at my pretty shoes." So the first thing that she knows is the sounds and the sequencing, right? She's saying these words, and every word has a couple of different sounds involved. She also knows the internal structures of the words, right? Notice how shoes has an S at the end instead of shoe, right? Shoes. She also uses it, she knows how to use each of these words in the sentence. And they are organized in a particular way. So notice how pretty comes before shoes. She also knows the meanings of the words. So look, meaning for you to pay attention to her and to visually see what she's doing. Also pretty, right, meaning something positive. She wants to say that they are attractive shoes. And then lastly, she's saying this sentence, and she's looking at shoes and touching the shoes in the context of maybe her closet or in a shop, right? So she knows the socially appropriate use of this phrase. If she were doing this in the context of an interview or in the context of a class, for example, then it would not be an appropriate sort of phrase to say or actions to take in that context. So these 5 different levels of knowledge that this lady represents, and that we show all the time in our use of language, represents the 5 subsystems of language. Sounds and sequencing is representing phonology, what we're going to study today, which is basically the study of the sound system. The internal structures of the words make up morphology, which is the study of word formation, or the ways in which we put different parts of words together. Use in a sentence represents syntax, which is the study of word order and placement. So, for example, how we know which words come first and which words are organized before other ones. The meaning of the word represents semantics, which is the study of word and phrase meanings, right? So shoes having one meaning, meaning, the objects that we place on our feet. And then pragmatics, which we are not going to get into in this class, but which represents the 5th subsystem of language, is the study of the social use of language, right? When it's appropriate to say what. If you can imagine, someone could be speaking 100% grammatically correctly, right? Saying like, "Look at my pretty shoes," which contains no errors. But if they don't know the socially appropriate ways in which to speak, when to say things and when to not, then pragmatics sort of kicks in and dictates whether that sentence, although it's grammatically correct, is being used socially appropriately.